All right, ladies and gentlemen, here it is, the grand finale of the Longbox Heroes Patreon show. Pirro Mounties, a little bit of a pun there. Todd and Joe here, but we are being joined by the writer, director, actor, grand poobah behind all these movies that we watched all year, and that is Mark Pirro himself. Mr. Pirro, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Happy to be here, guys.
Awesome. So we're going to get right into it. I am a big, when you get horror movies, you kind of get into a low-budget fandom, and I've seen so much stuff. And Todd, about a year ago, introduced me to Polish Vampire in Burbank, a movie I had never seen before. We did a whole thing last year where it was like, movies that either one of us had never seen. Todd introduces me to this movie. And I saw it, and I was blown away. I loved it. I was rolling on the floor laughing, and I was shocked that I had lived my life this long with never have seen this movie. Wow. Where does this inspiration come from? It's your first, full-length theatrical film. You get a name actor in it for a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if we'd call him a name actor, but semi-recognizable at the time, I guess.
So how does that come to be? From, the germ of the idea to rolling that first Super 8,
Right. Well, I made a lot of short films prior to that, and it was around the time when I thought, let's try and do a feature film. So a mutual friend of Eddie Deason introduced me to him and said, Eddie's never really starred in anything. He's always had a supporting role or a little featured bit, but this was going to be his starring role. So I said, great, let's do it. And he was happy to do it. And once we got underway, he understood that this wasn't exactly like a Spielberg film. So he wasn't going to get his dressing rooms or catered meals or limousine service. And so about a month or so into production, he decided didn't want to do it anymore. So at that point, it was, either we fold the production or I figure out a way to work around it. And we ended up rewriting the story in a way that I could utilize what we shot with him, or at least most of what we shot with him. And then I jumped into the role just to finish it out, and I kind of rewrote it as we went along. And then I ended up becoming the star, and his character sort of became secondary. And then it started resembling American Werewolf in London, where the main character comes back as a corpse, as a rotting corpse. And I thought, we'll change the title, because originally the title was called Virgin Vampire. That was going to be the movie. And then when he ended up leaving the film, I turned it into a Polish Vampire in Burbank, because we made a lot of Polish joke references in there, and his name was Dupa, which is a Polish word. And so that's kind of how that came about. And then, we shot it over a period of, I think, 2 years, utilizing some of the people that I had met when I was a tour guide at Universal Studios, and ended up just kind of piecing it together little by little. We never thought it was going to sell. It was made as basically a showcase. Let's show everybody we can make a movie. And once we were finished with it, we actually picked up a distributor that said, let's not tell anybody that you shot this for $2,500. Let's just push it like a regular movie. He took it to the Cannes Film Festival. He ran it there. He took it to other film festivals and made some sales. So nobody was more shocked than I was when this whole thing started selling. That's kind of it.
Yep. And I totally understand the Dupa reference, because I'm from the Polish section of my town. So when I saw it, I thought that was hysterical. I saw it when I was very, very young. I remember it appearing on either USA Up All Night, where I saw it first, or there was a Captain Commander USA thing on. And I remember seeing it, probably way too young to see it, but I saw it and I absolutely fell in love with it. So what's the road was that the thing that kickstarted into a cult thing, or was it before that?
I think that helped. I mean, it sold on home video first. It was on the home video market, and it did fairly well when it first came out, because it was one of the very first movies made directly for home video. Home video was kind of new. Right. So when home video came out, they were trying to grab whatever they could, and a lot of studios didn't want to give up their movies for home video because they were afraid of piracy and all that, and they were very expensive. So you might find older movies like Charlie Chaplin films or early Clark Gable movies. And it was just a hard thing to get a lot of movies on home video. Anyway, so here we have this movie, brand new, never seen before. And so they promoted it as a brand new movie for home video. And that started it. And then that led to the USA Network sale. That was another separate deal. And they bought it for a couple of years, put it on their Up All Night. And they put it on Commander USA, which was a daytime version of the same thing. But the movie was heavily edited when it hit USA Network, because there were so many things that we put in the movie that we didn't get proper clearance for, and they weren't going to run it with a lot of those things. Like we had a Sonny and Cher number in it that we didn't have the legal rights to use. We had, I think, a clip of the Three Stooges. We used Universal Studios tour Castle Dracula without any kind of permission. I forget, there were so many things, and they had a laundry list of things that we're just going to have to cut out. I think the movie itself ran about 60 minutes when it aired on USA Network, but they filled a 2-hour time slot, so you can imagine there were a lot of commercials in there. In fact, I think the USA version is up on YouTube. I think I've seen it there, with all the commercials intact and everything.
I think it has like the Captain Commander, Captain USA bits in there as well. It's just
right.
Like, somebody recorded off their TV. But you mentioned the castle that you guys used from Universal Studios. You mentioned being Universal tour guide. So many people in Hollywood, movies, behind the screen, in front of the screen, were Universal tour guides. Any cool stories? Anyone that you met there that you saw and you're like, ooh, that guy's going to go on to be something big, or this girl thinks she's going to be the next big thing, and I see where her path is going,
Right. Well, it's funny because a lot of the tour guides were celebrities' kids.
Okay.
I did a movie before Polish Vampire. It was a short James Bond parody called The Spy Who Did It Better. And we did that about a year or two before Polish Vampire. Ran about 45 minutes. And one of the actors in there was Eric Douglas, who is Kirk Douglas's youngest son, who has since passed on as well. And he actually, I met him as a tour guide. There was Stacy Webb, who was a tour guide. She was Jack Webb's daughter. Gregory Peck's kids, Tony and I think Celia, they were tour guides. So a lot of times, actually Danny Thomas's niece was a tour guide. Now, as far as anybody that started as tour guides and then went on to something, there were a couple. I think there was one, I can't think of his name, Brian something or other. He ended up accidentally shooting himself on the set. Ooh. He was a model-looking character, Brian something Green. You can probably Google it and fill in the gaps. But he was a tour guide with us way back when. Other people that we've met along the way that weren't necessarily tour guides, like John McCafferty, he was a tour guide, and he's been in most of my movies somewhere, either starring in them or he would have a smaller part. I met him as a tour guide. He ended up going on to star in a soap opera for a couple of years on NBC called Texas. And then, oddly enough, he lived in a condo in North Hollywood, and directly above him, Terry Hatcher lived there. So we met her through his living in this condo, and we'd play poker, and she'd come down and watch us. And, so as far as meeting people at Universal that became anything, I can't really say there were too many of those.
Right. So we had John McCafferty on our list. John's been in pretty much all of your stuff, as you mentioned, right. Feature roles or everything else like that. You said how you mentioned him. We talked about how we watch all these movies, and we made reference when we just recorded The Deceased Won't Desist the other day, that we get to see John evolve over like 35 years of these movies, from the dashing leading man to the distinguished looking guy that he is as the lawyer in your most recent film. Right. And obviously John's great to work with if he's in all your stuff. Anytime he pops up in something, we look at it and he shows up. It's like such a treat. Any other good stories about John or anyone else that's like a recurring person that you met from the original days? I know we're going to get into, like kind of maybe the back half where we see a lot of people pop up more often, but like John's been there from day one.
Yeah, John actually started with me on my very first short film, which is called Buns. And that runs like about 20 minutes. It's about a guy that goes into a murderous frenzy whenever he sees a hamburger, sort of like this hamburger serial killer. And in fact, I think there are clips from that up on YouTube as well. And it's also on the Death Row Game Show Blu-ray. That's an added feature, both of my short films, Buns and Spy Who Did It Better. But anyway, John did a cameo in that film. I had met him, like I say, as a tour guide, and he was trying to, get roles in movies. So I put this little thing together. It's like a $300 movie. We put it together in a matter of a couple of months. Then when I decided I wanted to do the James Bond parody, The Spy Who Did It Better, we put John in as the spy. So now he's playing this Sean Connery, James Bond type of character. And it was sort of a parody, but it was also my attempt to make a James Bond movie for like $1,000. So, we've got a scene where he's on a high-speed jet skateboard down the streets of Las Vegas, and we're going down old Las Vegas back then, and we put him in a shopping cart, and we had him do the whole bits, and and that's a cute film too. I mean, we really enjoyed making our own version of a James Bond film. Then he ended up then going to New York to do this soap opera, Texas. So when I started my first feature, which was Polish Vampire, he came to visit while we were shooting. And we put him in the jacuzzi scene. If you remember, there's a scene where there's a spy in the jacuzzi.
He's in the full tuxedo in the jacuzzi, right?
Jacuzzi. And that was basically a kind of an in-joke because he's talking about how everybody out there thinks I'm really an actor, but we all know I'm really a spy. And so he's making reference to the fact that he's out there trying to be an actor when in fact he's not. He's a spy. So we threw that in during that one quick moment. Then after a couple of years, he came back. He left New York, came back here, and that's when we started Curse of the Queer Wolf, which he played one of the queer billies in the Deliverance parody scene, which shows quite a range. I mean, completely opposite of anything he's ever done before. While we were working on that film, we were just about wrapping that film up, and then we moved on to Death Row Game Show, which was funded by a company called Crown Pictures. They hired me to put that project together. So we were just about finishing Queer Wolf when we got Death Row Game Show. And of course, John being my standby, I needed somebody that I knew I could rely on. And he was ready to go. So he became the star of that film. Moving on through the years, again, whenever I needed, like, I think Nudist Colony of the Dead, he went back to playing a geeky character again. When we did Rectuma, he did a cameo as the same guy he played in Queer Wolf, with the other guy next to him, which was, they were both priests in this film. In one moment when he just says, "You pull your pants down, boy." That those were the same two actors that were in Queer Wolf. And then moving on to Celluloid Soul, he did a little cameo in an old time movie. And then Rage of Innocence came before Celluloid Soul. That was another starring role for him. Did a great job. It was just, really my first serious film. It was the first movie that wasn't quite a cartoon like all the other ones that I had done. And then, ironically, the last film we did, The Deceased Won't Desist, we had COVID. Well, halfway, about a third of the way through the film, John panics, and he doesn't want to finish the movie.
Oh.
It was the first time I had had an actor bail on me since Polish Vampire. And I give him a little bit of a pass because we had to go up to a cabin up north, and there were like 10 actors crammed in this cabin. And, he's a senior citizen now, and he started to worry about being cooped up with all these people during the COVID scare. So we talked about it, and he said, "Mark, I really don't feel comfortable doing this." And I said, "Well, we got a movie to finish." We shot a third with him. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. I've done this before. Tried to think of my options. I wasn't going to replace him with a plastic skeleton. That wouldn't work for this film. So I thought, okay, you know what? If I can shoot him in front of a green screen, basically saying, okay, everybody, my job here is done. Good luck to you all. So I did. The scene where you see him putting on his jacket and leaving, that was all shot after the fact. And then I gave most of his dialogue that was going to continue on to the other actress. That the only other, there's two survivors at the end of the movie, basically, and they fight each other, the two women. The girl that ended up being the lesbian character, she got most of John's dialogue. She was supposed to die earlier on with the rest of them, and John's character was the only guy left between him and the ex-wife. Those two were going to fight it out at the end. And but because of John bailing on the film, I thought, okay, you know, well, it makes sense. He's the lawyer. He did his job. He started the tapes, and now he's leaving. And then I just gave most of the dialogue and such to her. She ended up surviving to the end of the movie, and that became the new ending. So there you have it.
That's interesting, because that's the movie that we watched last, obviously, because we went chronological order. And I was watching it. I always wondered, because that one kind of seemed like it was a mix of like Saw and the movie Clue and like a murder mystery, which is what it is. But I always felt like that there was something weird at the end. Was the killer always the killer? Because now that you're saying that John was going to the end, did you have to shuffle the deck chairs even more than that? Or was it pretty much the script, you know, it was who it was the whole time?
No spoilers, you know.
Right. That's
right. Well, it was always the killer, the one that's revealed at the end.
Okay.
Was always the killer. The only difference is that when the two women are fighting at the end, they both suspect each other, and one of them says, you know, you're the one that's doing this, and you know, how can I be the one that's doing this? And they end up basically killing each other. That was supposed to be John and the ex-wife. It wasn't supposed to be the lesbian gal. Okay. She was going to die early on. So that's really the only difference. I just gave more of the part to her. You know, so all the dialogue when they're sitting on the couch and they say, let's just watch out for each other and make sure that we take care of each other until morning. And there's three girls that are sitting on the couch. It was just supposed to be two girls and the lawyer. He was going to make it to the end. So that was the major change.
So we're going to be all over the place. We're talking about the deceased won't desist, the special effects in this, and obviously we're going to talk about the special effects that you've done in a lot of the movies. Since you lean heavy, a lot of horror stuff. You mentioned Rage of Innocence being like your first one that, as you said, wasn't a cartoon. When you started to do the special effects, especially now in more of a digital age, versus let's say Nudist Colony of the Dead, there's a special effect in that movie, and I'm more of a horror movie guy, so when I see a special effect like that, the guy who's running, and like his body just the head comes off and the body keeps going, right? I must have sat there and watched that scene frame by frame, and thinking to myself, how the hell did they do that? I was blown away, and sometimes with special effects like that, it's like the easiest thing, so obviously it was different. Like, what aspect of it did you enjoy? Like back then where you had to rely completely on practical, or nowadays where you could do the practical and the digital together? Well,
you know, it's apples and oranges. I mean, it was interesting when things were a lot tougher that you had to create, practically. Now digital makes it a little easier if you have the skill or you have the ability to do what you need to do. I think in a lot of cases, there were things that I wish we had back in the day, especially like when we did Polish Vampire. I mean, I wish we had the technology to use digital skeletons instead of, a little plastic skeleton head that you could buy in a model shop and a coat hanger with, I don't even remember, we just put crap on it, but it's obviously a coat hanger with the head. So I would have loved to have had the technology then. Of course, it would have been a whole different deal. And nowadays, you can do so many things that way. The effect that we did that you were referring to, sometimes the magician's tricks are the easiest to once you find out the trick. And if you watch that film very carefully, you'll notice that when you see him running, you don't see his feet, you see his legs. Mm-hmm. It was controlled out of frame. We were working the legs like this as they were running, and just like two sticks in there. And then when he falls over, that's just a separate cut of, another thing. And then I think we show the shot of his feet when they're already on the ground, which was just done having the actor, the top half of the actor out of frame. But yeah, you have to come out with these innovative sort of ways to get things done. And a movie like Nudist Colony of the Dead, you can get away with a lot of cheap stuff because, I think people are more forgiving for a movie like that than they might be today, because now everybody's, got their eye on, I know how they did that and whatever. So things have changed quite a bit.
Like I was going to say in Deceased Don't Desist, the character, and again, just going to pretend people are going to watch these, hopefully not be spoiled. The character who burns up in the car. There's
right.
a lot of digital, but there's a practical effect. There's a physical head in there. And I watch a lot of stuff. I watch a lot of newer stuff. I watch a lot of stuff that's been made in the last 10 years when it comes to horror movies, when it comes to pretty much anything. And I know you're probably not working with a huge budget, and you see these movies that are on like Netflix, and you hear of $1 million budgets, even $2 million budgets. And the stuff that you did in that movie looks like head and shoulders over stuff that I've seen in what are supposed to be these like higher end, low budget movies. And again, I'll name one, like Terrifier. Okay, I don't know if you saw Terrifier, especially the sequels, like this big success.
Yeah, I think I missed that one.
But it's the killer clown thing. Like, I forget what the clown's name is. But there's effects. There's one big effect in the first movie that's unbelievable. It'll knock your socks off if you're a horror person. But all the other effects in it are like kind of like little guys. You know what I mean? Like, I really think someone who's been at it like as long as you've been, 40 years that you've been making films, to see it go from Super 8 to digital, I think you really have a lot that you can impart. Like, even filmmakers today can watch your stuff. Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought of like doing like a book or a course or how-to things or anything like that?
Yeah, I've done all those. I wrote a book maybe 30 years ago. It's called, what is it even called? Ultra Low Budget Movie Making.
Okay.
It was out for a while. It was well, I guess back in the days when it wasn't really self-published, but I had a distributor that got it into some libraries and got it into some places. I think Amazon might even still be selling it. I don't know. But it's kind of outdated today because it was before digital filmmaking. So it really talked about the practicality of shooting on a low medium like Super 8 or 16. And the principle of making movies is still the same. I really get into how you need to get people on your team that are going to support what you're doing, because there's always a flake here and there that's going to be there for a while and then back off. So the book kind of went into that. I used to talk at colleges. I talked at UCLA. I talked at Calabasas School. I used to make the rounds and do that. And as I got older, I started feeling more like one of these old codgers saying, you damn kids today don't know what it's like to make a movie with your damn CDs and DVDs. We used to have to put pieces of film together. And sometimes we had to use Scotch tape to put those damn things together, So, but and I'm always toying with the idea of maybe putting a seminar together and, just basically doing one of these things for young filmmakers. And of course, a lot of times today, filmmakers know more than I did, because they've got the technology at their fingertips. It's almost impossible to make a bad looking film today, because you've got these, you could shoot a movie with your iPhone and it'll look pretty decent if you know how to light a set. And even if you don't, but when we were doing our films in Super 8, sometimes we would struggle just to get an exposure. That was especially the case with Nudist Colony of the Dead. There's a lot of shots in there that are either underexposed or underfocused, and because you can't see it immediately. You'd have to wait a week to see what you shot, and then if it's bad, you either have to figure out if you're going to get your actors again and go back and fix it, or live with what you got. So there was always that issue with the old days. I'd never shoot another Super 8. I don't even know why people still do it today. I think some people are still doing it because it's like, I don't know, new or it's retro. I don't know. But, you can take a digital image and make it look like you shot it on Super 8 if you wanted to, So there's, I've really, in my later years, I tried to get more visual and try to get the vision, the optics better. My friend Craig Bassick, who goes all the way back to Polish Vampire with me, as he was the DP on that film. He was also the director of photography on Death Row Game Show, Nudist Colony of the Dead, and he did some of the visual effects. He's kind of into visual effects now, and he did that effect of the head burning in the car. That was a practical mold that he made of the actor's face, you know, and he created this thing that we put in the car and used that. He also did some of the. There's a scene where the guy's getting his eyes gouged out.
Yep. With the eye drops.
Right. He did a lot of those effects. The cracking of the mirror. We couldn't really crack a mirror. We shot that in John McCafferty's bathroom, and he wouldn't take too kindly to that. So the whole cracking of the mirror effect was Craig's doing. I also have a friend named Glenn Campbell that's been involved with me from the early days. We were tour guides together. He is now a visual effects supervisor at Asylum Films. So all the Sharknado movies, he did the visual effects.
Okay, yeah, sure.
In fact, he hired me to work on the last two because the budget escalated and they needed more technicians to do some of the rotoscoping and all that. So he had called me and Craig, as a matter of fact, in to do some of the visual effects on those films. But Glenn is always there to help me with mine. So if I need a specific effect that I'm incapable of doing, like when we did the God Complex, we had a scene where God's in a control room and he's got all these monitors and he's looking at the world. I didn't have the skill to do that. So Glenn created that environment of God's control room for me and basically said, okay, all you need to do is just replace the images with whatever you want in there. And he taught me. He pretty much taught me how to use After Effects. And so in the later films, most of the effects I can do on my own. The car crash effect in Celluloid Soul, he did that. That was his whole thing. So it's, like I say, it's a combination of knowing people that have a certain skill, and yet they might have their own job where they make money. But whenever I would say, I got a project, you ready to do it? They'll put some time aside and do it, in many cases without pay, because a lot of times there is no budget. My last several films were probably 4 figures or less, and I say that not that I'm proud of that, but it's just so practical now to make a movie if you have the organization to get people to commit. And when we did Deceased, it took about 3 or 4 trips up to this cabin, which was about an hour and a half away from where most of us live here in Los Angeles. And we would have to coordinate with the actors, to get them up there. And sometimes we couldn't get them all, so then we would go up with just a couple of actors. There's a couple of scenes where the old lady is the only one that's not there. And yet we shot her separately. So you'll see some scenes where she's, talking to the rest of the ensemble, but she's by herself sitting in a different chair because she couldn't be there the day that most of them were there. There's a lot of putting it together like a jigsaw puzzle many times.
Right, because I remember hearing somewhere during Rage of Innocence, I can't remember the young actress's name, but she ended up getting... What was it? She got a part in the Hunger Game movies? Yeah,
she got into the last 2, actually the last 3, and we were in production when she got the call that she had gotten Hunger Games, and I started to panic because I thought, well, that's the end of that. She's not coming back. Why would she? But she did. We waited. I mean, we continued the movie with doubles while she was gone. She was gone for, I don't know, a few months. And there's a lot of scenes where it's not her. Very many scenes, in fact, if you watch it carefully, like when she's being interrogated by she's hooked up to a lie detector. That the scene that was shot in black and white briefly. That's not her. Although there's a close up of her, which I borrowed from a different scene, where you see one close up of her face saying, yes, he attacked me or whatever. The scene where she kills the babysitter. It's sort of like a silhouette of her where she's standing behind the babysitter. Babysitter moves out of the way and she plunges a knife into her. That was all with a double. Again, anytime you don't physically see her face. If you see the back of her head, side of her face, whatever, it was a double. The confrontation scene at the end between McCafferty and her, when she's holding his daughter hostage with a knife to her throat, that was a double on his close-up. You see the back of her head. When we cut to her, that was months later when she was done with Hunger Games. But excuse me, when she came back, I actually felt intimidated because, here we got this actress who had been, working with the big time directors and probably had all of the amenities that a celebrity is going to get. Then she comes back to My Little Dog and Pony World, and I almost felt like I was embarrassed to say action. And I felt like saying, have you a moment? There were times when I thought, it's almost like I felt like, a guy that loses a girlfriend to some other guy with a bigger dick. And then she comes back out of pity and gives you one final plunge. That's kind of what it felt like, but she was great because she did come back. She did finish the rest of her stuff. We even had her in for a day or two of voiceover looping, and thorough professional. And again, I thanked her again and again. And she goes, hey, I committed to this project, and here I am. So, she was wonderful to work with. In fact, she was probably one of a handful of actresses or actors that I've worked with that were, thoroughly professional, always knew the lines, always hit the marks. And that's not easy to do when you're working, on a nothing budget, because sometimes you get what you get, And I've had the range. I've had top notch, the best, and I've had the bottom of the barrel too, which that takes a lot of editing when you get that end of it.
Well, I'll say this on Rage of Innocence. I think you did a great job. Todd and I, we do a comic book podcast. We'll get into your feelings on the comic book movies here shortly, but we watch some of the TV shows, and some of the stuff that's on TV, we watch them, and we're like, oh, they left that shot in? Or that's the angle that they're using? Like, you could very clearly tell that's, like, not the right person. And Rage of Innocence, I couldn't tell there was a body double. I got to go back and watch it now to see if I can pick out those shots,
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
But we're talking special effects. I want to talk about Celluloid Soul, the black and white effect to get the lead female into the color world, if you will. Mm-hmm. It feels as though that's an effect that can go one way or the other. You're either going to nail it or you're going to blow it. And I feel, you mentioned before, you're talking about movies that are made for under 5 figures, 4 figures. I think you nailed it in that movie. Like, you cannot see the seams of where, like, the black and white ends and the color begins and vice versa. And obviously, it's movie magic. It's everything else like that. But on such a low budget, I was, like, my socks were knocked off on how great the production did on that.
Oh, very cool. Did you see these on Tubi, I'm guessing?
Yes.
Okay, because I know on the DVDs, we actually have some behind-the-scenes shots that show how those effects were done. And because when we premiered the movie, that was a question that came up in the audience, and it wasn't one specific effect. It really depended on what we needed. Like, if she was by herself, it was pretty much green screen. That was probably the easiest way to get her, and then we could put her in whatever environment we wanted her to be. If there was interaction between her and the male lead, we would either sometimes just have her in gray makeup, and she would literally be gray, and then I would add speckles and scratches on top of that, which is one of the things I regret, is that we put her in that black wig, which I wish we didn't have to do.
That was my next question.
Yeah, I really wish we didn't do that. But when we were thinking, okay, if she has brown hair normally, and I thought, okay, if I'm going to have to rotoscope around her head, that's going to be a nightmare. And so we thought, let's put her in a black wig and we'll get away with that. And again, in retrospect, I should have just gotten black hairspray. They have that temporary hairspray we could have used. That would have been the better answer. But other times it was rotoscoping, which was literally, if you're unfamiliar with the word, it's tracing around the actor. And you create a separate layer where she's one layer, the regular footage is the second layer, and then you trace around her so that any movement she makes, you have to follow her with that. And there might be a couple of shots where it might have missed, like if you looked at it very carefully, you might see a finger go out of frame color-wise or something. But I worked on it for a very long time to try and get it as tight as I could. And there was like one scene, the one of the toughest scenes is when the two of them are walking. There's a scene where after he comes out of the drugstore and they're walking together.
Outside, and like natural light and the whole, sure.
Right. And the way that was done, and there might even be on YouTube. There might be one of the effect shots on YouTube. I forget. But we actually did this where the two of them were walking far apart from each other. There was somebody behind her with a green screen. So here she is, and there's a green screen directly behind her. Two of them are walking, so now they're in the same world together, all right? And then in the computer later on, I moved her closer to him with her and the green screen. Then I knocked out the green screen, so the background was still the same. So the two of them are walking in the same world. You follow me?
Yeah.
And that was one of the scenes I was most proud of, because it was one of those things where it's like, okay, this works, and at first I tried shooting them separately, and that didn't work because it looked like, like the weather woman, the weatherman. It just wasn't in sync. So he'd be moving like this, she'd be moving like that. And so I said, the only way this is going to work is if they're moving together at the same time. But the only way I could do that is I'd have to separate them, put a green screen behind her, and then I could move her closer later. And that's how that particular shot was done. But there were so many different variations of how we achieved that effect throughout the film. One of my favorite ones is when we actually shot the old time movie. I loved doing those scenes because we made it look like the movie was shot in the 30s. And one of my actresses from another movie, the girl that played the Jodie Foster character in Rectuma, Jean Black, she happened to have a kitchen that looks like it hadn't been remodeled since the 30s. I mean, that kitchen that is used for that one moment when we're watching an old time movie. In fact, she's in the scene. She plays the scene opposite McCafferty in that scene. That was her kitchen. And I saw that and I said, that's the one we're going to use, So, you just try to put these things together to try and fulfill a fantasy of whatever you're trying to achieve. And sometimes you get lucky and it works, sometimes not so lucky.
Yeah. And in Cellular Soul, you had like the YouTube video where the guy finds the YouTube video and he's like, this is who it is. And in that, like, the thing that I love about your movies, we talked about, and I mean this with respect, the ridiculousness of it. Like you say, you're doing a cartoon, you're doing this, you're doing that. And then you'll have this scene. And in all honesty, that scene, like, I thought was very touching. And that's the thing that I love about your style. And in other movies, it happens too. It's like you have this, and then you end on her just doing the voiceover of that scene, that in your like goofy, fun movies, you have heart and I believe a very good writing. And also in Rage of Innocence, like the voiceover at the end, you find out who it really was, talking about how, his parents have got over things. Like, do you try to balance that, or is that just something that comes later, or like, how do you go into something like that?
That's a good question. And in both of those cases, I'm not even sure if the narration was really part of the script. I think that might have been something that I did later. It's like, I think it was James Cameron that once said, when you make a movie, you actually write it 3 times. You write it when you are writing it, then you rewrite it as you're filming it. And then you write it again as you're editing it, because you find things that don't work and you take things out or you add things. The going for Rage of Innocence, I'd have to go back and look at the script and see if the narration was still there. But I know that when it ended, I kind of stole that idea from Martin Scorsese's Cape Fear. You remember when Juliette Lewis, yeah.
Yes.
I don't know if she starts the movie with narration, but I know she ends the movie with narration. So I kind of borrowed that little moment, and I love the bit where Chelsea, the actress in my film, says, well, Raven's movie is over with now, fade out. And then she looks to the camera and we fade out. That kind of gives me a little chills. And then
yep.
And then the bit with in Celluloid Soul, I don't remember if the narration was in there. I think it may not have been. It may have just ended with him talking to the gravestone, and then we see her fade away, and that might have just been the end. So, that was 17. That's like 5 years ago. So, like, sometimes I'd have to go back and look at the script and see what was in and what wasn't. But I'm not 100% sure if the narration was there. When I'm editing a movie, I kind of will run through the scenes, and I might say, what do I need to make this better, or what do I need to make this clearer? Sometimes it'll come to me in a moment, and sometimes I might, wake up the next day and say, I got it, But, and I never put that much thought into my earlier films. My earlier films were just kind of like, mad dash, let's have fun. It was as I got older, and I guess, I don't know, I hate to use the word more mature. I don't like that word, but as one got older, one sort of did feel more heart to put into a film. There's not a lot of heart in my earlier films. Maybe Colorblinded might get close to it, but most of my earlier films were, like I say, cartoons. You don't take them seriously. The characters are caricatures. But it wasn't until the later half of my career, which I would say Colorblinded onward is probably where I started caring more about the characters and really wanting to make them, even something as ridiculous as Rectuma, make the characters believe their moments, believe the situations that they're in. And, I think if anything, that was probably one of the things that I may have grown as a filmmaker.
Well, the one thing that I'm glad you haven't grown with as a filmmaker, you mentioned about the writing and stuff. We're talking about, Deceased, because that's the most recent one. The fact that it's this heady premise, there's the location shot, there's all these characters, but you still take the time to throw in there the gags, like with the drunk at the bar, right? And, like, you don't see stuff like that in movies anymore. That feels very, like, 80s, 90s comedy. And when it came up in this, it felt like so refreshing. It's like, this is, like, missing from movies. These are the movies that, like, we grew up on watching. A gag like this doesn't do anything to really move the plot along, but it's just a character bit. It's a funny joke. You bring the audience along, and I love the fact that you still have stuff like that in your films.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear that you like it. I mean, this is, when I put these things in, sometimes I kind of refer to, like, I call it a Quentin Tarantino, because sometimes he'll do the same thing. He'll throw in references to other things that have nothing to do with what's going on. And I would always say to my director of photography, give me a Tarantino here. Like, that means give me a close-up of something that doesn't need to have a close-up of. Like, I think there's a scene in Celluloid Soul where he comes home and he throws the keys on the table. And I got a close-up of the keys going on the table. No reason for it, but that's a Tarantino moment for me. I think the scene in Deceased where she grabs the poker and gets ready to, fight off the other girl with the poker. Give me a Tarantino of here grabbing the poker, So you start adding more of these little fragments to the show to give it more depth. And sometimes there are shots that probably I didn't need to spend the time to get that other little shot in there. There might be times when it's like, well, let's do it just to break it up. But, it's almost like it's like music, I guess. If I were a musician, you could stop with just 2 or 3 different instruments, or you could add more instruments to it, and you could add more depth to it, which is something that just comes along as the creative process moves along.
Right. And as you're talking about your little director, like the things that are your style as director in the writing, how much of it, because I see a lot of things is meta, like you doing putting it in because that's the way it is for you, kind of like in the God Complex when you do the shaky cam bit. Where like they're talking to Jesus and they're like, would you hold the goddamn camera straight? And dear God, I hope that never catches on. Like, how much do you like sliding like Mark Pirro the way you think into like getting that out there? Because I've seen a couple that we're probably going to hit as we go.
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I've never been a fan of the shaky cam, and I've seen it. In fact, I won't watch a Bourne Identity movie anymore. I watched, I think, one of them. And I felt like I was on a roller coaster. It's like I don't even remember. I think maybe the first movie I saw it in might have been one of the early Woody Allen films, or not early, but one of his films where it's like there was no tripod. Everything was handheld. And I thought, this is like a student film. Then I noticed it started catching on more and more. And as you watch a lot of these mainstream movies, I think it's called a nervous camera. I think that's the official title for it. Because whenever you're watching a scene and it's supposed to be tense, you might start seeing the camera do these crazy moves because that's supposed to subconsciously make the audience unnerved. Well, it makes me unnerved consciously. So that's why I put that reference into it in my movie where the camera is obviously going nuts. And then he turns and says, put that fucking thing on a tripod. Because that's what I would have said if I were in a movie theater and I wanted to scream at the filmmaker. So there might be other moments in my films where my personality will come through. I'm not a fan of religion, which is probably obvious if you've seen my films, but it came to a head in the God Complex, although I've hinted at it in other films. I think there's a scene in Queer Wolf where he is, the four torchmen come into his house and attack them. And then later on, his girlfriend says, what's going on with you? And he goes, I just have a terrible problem. And she says, why was there a priest in our house tonight? Are you involved in some kind of religion? He goes, no, my problem is not quite as disastrous as that. That was a gotcha in there. And I think in News Colony of the Dead, the whole thing is battling the religious zealots. That probably stems from my childhood as well, brought up Catholic until I reached the age of reason. Then there's God Complex, which is, we go full force and skewer the Bible with no holes barred, which at the time, I was getting a little resistance because I have a couple of religious friends, which I keep around just for comic relief. And, they know me and they know that none of my movies are done to be malicious. They're done simply to entertain. And it's kind of like telling a joke that's off color. And you're not going to tell the joke it's like, I remember we had a screening once of Polish Vampire, and I was doing a Q&A. And a lot of people, again, they understand that I don't come from a malicious place. I'm doing it to be comical. And somebody raised his hand and said, why did you pick Poland? I go, I don't know. It just sounded funny. Polish Vampire in Burbank. His name is Dupa. I thought it was funny. He goes, well, I'm Polish. I said, should I talk slower? I got a laugh, and that was the end of that. But I anytime I put whatever might be part of me in it, like there's a whole conversation at the beginning of Celluloid Soul where they're in the car and he's talking to his girlfriend and she's going, yeah, it has to be a higher power that makes these things happen. And he's going like, no, it's not. It's like putting water in a cup. The water is going to take the shape of the cup and all that. That's probably partially me too, But I think any writer is going to pull from whatever they've got to pull from in their repertoire. So, yeah.
I definitely feel, you mentioned your religious upbringing until reason. I had a religious upbringing. I have a son. He doesn't have that sort of religious upbringing. So I always wonder when I watch a movie like yours and I'm like, if references are references like this eventually going to go out of style, or are people just not going to get them anymore? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think religion is going to ever really go away. I think to a certain extent, because now we do have more ways of researching things, and you have people that can actually go on the internet and try to find resources and answers and all that. I think organized religion in itself will eventually dissolve, but there'll always be fringes. There are people that still believe the world is flat. There's still people out there that, the people that vote for Trump, and they think that he's God's second coming. So there's always going to be that somewhere. But I think the numbers are diminishing now. If you look back on any of these movies 20 or 30 or 50 years from now, it might be looking at a movie that was made in the 30s that talked about what the future was going to be like. There's some kind of humor that I think is kind of timeless. Like you can look at an old Monty Python movie, and the jokes still work. It's a different type of humor. And I think the line was drawn back when Airplane came out. I think Airplane changed comedy originally, because that's when actually, no. There was a movie before that, Kentucky Fried Movie.
Oh, yes.
That kind of set the pace. I think that was around the time Saturday Night Live started coming out, or I think maybe a couple years afterwards. But, everybody tries different things and they want to try to reinvent the wheel. And then, like when you look at a movie like Airplane or the Naked Gun movies, brilliant. The comedy was great. They had straight actors playing these comedic parts, whereas in the 70s they would have hired Harvey Korman and Dom DeLuise and Jonathan Winters to play these parts. But to get Leslie Nielsen and Peter Graves and get all those straight actors, that was a brilliant move. But then later on, in my opinion, Leslie Nielsen kind of wore out his welcome, because then he started to play the clown, and he started to do these movies where he was like, look at me, I'm funny now. And then I started losing it, for him. I mean, because it's funny when the person playing the comedy doesn't think he's being funny. Again, in my opinion, I think there's you got the slapstick, like the Jim Varney, Ernest movies that went on to make a lot of money too, which is the other side of the coin. That's me. Look at me. I am funny. Laugh. That's a throwback to Jerry Lewis, who was the clown. So there's different types of humor. There's different types of comedy. And I think that sometimes if you look back at, like, you look at a Jerry Lewis movie today, I don't know if it's going to get a laugh with a regular audience. It'll get a laugh with his fans, and it'll get a laugh with people that are into that world. But if you just put it in front of today's kids, they're going to look at this and probably say, this is dumb, and somebody years from now might look at my stuff and say, what's the humor here? It could go the other way too, because they could also say, we made Curse of the Queer Wolf before transgender was a thing. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't, I don't think you'd heard about it much. And we did it because it was funny. It actually happened to a friend of mine that was in a bar, and he picked up a girl that turned out not to be a girl. He told me that story, and I thought, that's the funniest thing I ever heard. What'd you do? You were reaching down there and you found a big pair of sweaty spheres, something like that. What a great idea for a film. But, it started out as a minor character in Polish Vampire, and then I expanded it in Curse of the Queer Wolf. But, and I got a lot of heat at the time. Oh, why would you want to make a movie like this? They wanted me to change the title. They wanted me to do all these different things, because then we can't sell a movie like this. Okay, well, this is the movie I wanted to make. They wanted to call it Curse of the Weird Wolf or give it some weird title. And, so I stuck with my guns and said, no, this is the movie I want to make. Now, today, nobody has a problem with it. It's in fact, gays sort of embrace this movie because they know it's not a homophobic movie. It's a comedy about two straight guys that run into a situation that's totally bizarre.
I remember when we watched it, obviously you dip your toes into the 80s and you come across a lot of comedies that don't handle situations like this and I don't want to say sensitivity, but in a much more hard-edged, much more mocking way. And your movie definitely did not have that. And we were like, this is like crazy progressive for a movie of this time. Like, you could just take this movie whole cloth today, put it out today, and like, you really wouldn't have to like worry about being, canceled or whatever it is, because, you could tell the sensibilities, as you mentioned, of your sensibilities and the people involved. That came across that there was no malice, there was no hatred, there wasn't laugh at these people. It was more like, this is a story we're telling, and these are the characters that we're using for it.
Right, but you'll always find somebody that's going to have a problem. You can't please everybody, and I never.
No.
My goal has always been to please me and my audience. So it's like, what makes me laugh? And the other advantage is, because these movies were shot on such a low budget, I didn't have to answer to anybody. If I had a studio behind me, they'd probably say, you got to change this, you got to cut this, you can't do that, whatever. So when you're making a movie and you have no one to answer to, you can do these things. And again, we never really expected these movies to make anything. Once we did Polish Vampire, we thought, well, maybe we have a future and we can do these things. But it got to a place where I always wanted to make a movie that I would enjoy watching. A couple of times I did horror myself out for the money. Like Buford's Beach Bunny is a perfect example. That's not a movie I would have made on my own. But that was a company that hired me to make a sex comedy. So I did it for the money. And I was very disappointed by that, because I didn't have final cut. So when they when it went out, they re-edited it and, took the heart of my jokes, but left the sex in. So they wanted, I guess, more sex, less jokes. And now you've got setups and no punchlines. And I ended up putting out a director's cut version on my website because that's the only way you can see it the way I intended it to be made, which was like 101 minutes, I think. And now they cut it down to 90 minutes, something like that. But, but I determined at that point I would never make another movie for another person that I didn't have complete control over. Because, whether you get paid or not, the movie's going to last. It's going to follow you around like a bad case of herpes, so you make a bad movie, it's going to be there forever. Beach Bunnies is part of my library and it's going to be around. Everything else I've done, I'm pretty happy with the exception of Nudist Colony of the Dead. And that's only because of the inferior look that it has, the quality of it. But other than that, I stand behind every other film I make, whether it insults people. Like my sister is very religious. Wasn't a big fan of the God Complex. In fact, I think it's one of the only premieres she did not choose to show up at. But it wasn't made for her. She's not the audience. The audience are people that are evolved a little bit and can laugh at the absurdity. And I know a few religious people that do enjoy the God Complex. My one religious friend, who is, like I say, very religious, she was laughing at parts of it. The only part she doesn't like is the burning bush segment. She thought that was a little over the top. But yeah, I never make these to, oh boy, who can I offend? No, let's just make a movie that people can enjoy. You found it, you enjoyed it. There are other people out there that might have the opposite opinion. Why would he do such trash? You can read some of the reviews. I know that some of the early reviews, they would look at these movies and go, what a waste of time. Why are these films out? Death Row Game Show got across the board bad reviews when it first came out. Since it's been re-released on Blu-ray, it's gotten much better reviews because I guess the world caught up to it. Television is almost like Death Row Game Show now. You've got crazy things happening in the world the Death Row Game Show would fit in perfectly in today's world. So sometimes you're ahead of the curve and you don't even know it.
Yeah, and you're talking about like your film catalog and stuff like that. Do you consider it like a shared universe? I know that I'm doing that in tongue in cheek because a lot of times I noticed that Gloria Sternvirgin from, you mentioned Death Row Game Show, would be like cameo all through it. And she was originally like a talk show host. And now she's, a news reporter. So you always have the news crawl and you have all that stuff. And she moves throughout the movies. Do you think of it as a big, like there's always a Rectuma poster in the background like you have in your office there and stuff like that. I love it. So I always consider it the Pirro shared universe, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, a lot of that is inadvertent. Like Robin Blythe, who played Gloria Sternvirgin, we've stayed friends for years. She was my girlfriend at the time, oddly enough. But when we did Death Row Game Show, we did that film. And then when we did Nudist Colony of the Dead, she did a lot of the singing in that film. A lot of those voices are redubbed, and she's doing some of the singing, so she helped me out. When we did Rectuma, I just said, you want to do a cameo? And she was just going to be the news reporter. But then I thought, well, what the fuck? We'll just put, Gloria Sternvirgin underneath it so we can kind of make a reference to her because it's the same person. And then same thing in Deceased Won't Desist. We needed a newscaster. I asked her if she wanted to do it for, we could shoot it in an afternoon. And the calling her Gloria Sternvirgin was, again, an afterthought. But yeah, then it does kind of tie it all together. And the same thing with the Queerbillies from Curse of the Queerwolf, to get McCafferty and Patrick Hunter, who played the second Queerbilly, to play the queer priests in Rectuma, exact same actors. That's part of the same deal. Although I don't think McCafferty got credit on that film. I think he did that one without his name on the credits, but he was the same character. So yeah, I do tend to, and in fact, Jesus, the character that played Jesus in the God Complex, Dennis Kennard, who was also the star of Celluloid Soul, he plays Jesus again in Deceased Won't Desist, in the priest's dream sequence. Same guy. So, I do enjoy sometimes using the same actors, and I guess it goes back to McCafferty playing the spy in Polish Vampire, making reference to him being the spy and the spy who did it better. So, but it's not really planned, I did at one time start writing a sequel to Nudist Colony of the Dead, which was going to be a direct sequel to the original. And it was going to make reference to the original movie a lot. I was going to use some of the same actors that are still around from the original movie. And there was going to be one in joke that they were going to say, "Can you remember what happened 20 years ago?" Because, well, it's kind of foggy. In fact, it's kind of underexposed, and it's kind of out of focus. But it's coming back to me. And, I was going to use reference to the fact that the first movie was underexposed and unfocused, blah, blah, blah. But other than that, it's usually an unconscious thing if I do it. And then when I'm editing the movie and I think, oh, yeah, let's call her Gloria Sternbergen again and make her the same character, from the old days.
When we were watching the movies and we would see the characters popping up again and again in some of the earlier stuff or themes, or like, here's in My Mom's a Werewolf, and then there's the poster for something else in the background. It's like, oh, these movies all exist together, and we just laugh because as the movies go on, and you take shots, and rightfully so in some points, at some of your bigger budget comic book movies these days. And obviously, I guess you're not a fan of those, but,
I can take them or leave them,
Okay.
I think, I don't remember any direct, I think there's like one character maybe it's in Rage of Innocence where she's talking about didn't care much for Avengers, or she named her kid after X-Men's Raven.
Right.
She might say, "I'm not a big fan of the movie, but I like the character." I mean, that's just, it's just the character talking. I mean, because I could watch the movies and not, I don't have an opinion either way on those.
Right. And then on another one that you do mention throughout the movie, so I don't know if it's your opinion, is you take shots at Daniel Craig as James Bond. And I'm gathering you, and especially McCaffrey, because he does a spot-on Sean Connery, you're fans of James Bond, but did not like Daniel Craig as... I'm a big James Bond fan. That's why
I was. I turned in my card when Daniel Craig took it over, because I thought, when I first heard Daniel Craig was in the movie, I thought, oh, he'll make a great bad guy. And then it's like, no, he's Bond. What are you thinking? What? Now, don't forget, I'm old school. I'm Sean Connery, James Bond. I mean, I would be, no exaggeration, I would be the first in line and the last to leave the theater when a Sean Connery Bond movie was out. And when Diamonds Are Forever came out, that was after he left for one movie and came back. I must have seen the movie, without exaggerating, 20, 30 times in the theater. Of course, movies were 25 cents then, 50 cents, but still. So I was a big, huge James Bond fan, so much so I met Barbara Broccoli at her house years ago. In fact, John McCafferty and I went to her house to watch On Her Majesty's Secret Service with her when she was 19. And that was because at the time, my friend Eric Douglas knew the Broccolis. Because they shot, there's a scene in Diamonds Are Forever where Plenty O'Toole gets drowned in a swimming pool. That was at Kirk Douglas's summer house. That's where they shot it. So Eric and Kirk, they knew the Broccolis. So at one time, Barbara was shooting a Super 8 film, a short Super 8 film, when she was learning filmmaking. And Eric said to me, "Would you like to help Barbara Broccoli shoot a little Super 8 movie?" It's like, would I? Yes. So we met her, and I was talking to her about how I'm making my own little James Bond parody called The Spy Who Did It Better. And I said, but my James Bond actor, he's more like a George Lazenby than a Sean Connery. And he's never seen On Her Majesty's Secret Service. She said, well, come on over, we'll run it. And this was before VHS. So we ran it on 16 millimeter in her guest house. So cool. Again, McCafferty and I are the only two that can really verify the story, but it happened. And then, I'm good friends with Steve Rubin, who wrote the James Bond Encyclopedia. So, I'm a pretty big Bond aficionado. Anyway, wasn't a huge Roger Moore fan, but I came to accept him because even though Roger Moore was a different Bond, they still followed the formula kind of. I mean, they kind of veered off into Matt Helm area, but, it still felt Bond-ish. But when the first Daniel Craig movie came out, I watched the first one because I thought I'd give it a shot. As soon as it didn't start with a gun barrel sequence, I knew we were going to be in trouble right then and there, because that's the thing that every Bond fan used to get excited about. That would be what gets you in the mood, that those circles going across the screen and him coming there and him shooting and the red veil comes down. That's what gets you into it. Well, the first one didn't start with that, and that was the beginning of my trouble with the film. And then, of course, I couldn't identify with him. He was like he was like a whiny little bitch throughout the movie. You know, he wasn't cool. Bond used to be cool, right? So, and then, you know, I had not seen one in its entirety since Casino Royale. So I feel 4 other movies have been wasted for me or with me. You know, I've seen clips. I've gone on YouTube and like I watched the last 5 minutes of the last one over and over and over again on a loop because that's the only part I enjoy watching. But I don't, you know, I just couldn't get into it. So, yes, I put little digs, but they're comical digs about.
No, yeah, I get it.
In my films, because anybody that knows me knows that's kind of the way I feel about the Daniel Craig era. And, you know, so, yeah. That's it.
I got in. I mean, I'll admit because I'm a little younger. I got in on the Roger Moore. So Roger Moore is my guy. But you know, I appreciate the Sean Conners. I did not like the Timothy Dalton ones. I thought they were kind of weak. They went a different way. Right. But I kind of like the Daniel Craig. For me, I have fun with them. I feel they're a different one. But my problem with James Bond, I think, is we're in the day where gadgets are real. You know what I mean? Like that was the cool thing about James Bond. It was like, oh, I have my compressed air pen in my pocket, or I have my laser watch, or my magnet this, and it's like I could do 3/4 of the things James Bond did in the 70s with my phone. You know what I mean? And I think that's what's going to hurt James Bond from here on out. If that makes sense.
I think that's why they kind of had to go in a different direction, and I understand. You know, I mean. Bond in the early days used to be the leader and everybody followed Bond. You know, they would make these Bond parodies. In the late 60s, you couldn't go to a movie theater without seeing a Bond parody or a Bond ripoff. You know, they did the Matt Helm series. They did the Michael Caine, Harry Palmer. They did the Derek Flint with, I can't think of his name, James Coburn. Anyway, They did a bunch of those. Then around the 70s, it was the other way around. Bond started following what was popular. They had the Kung Fu movies that were really popular in the late 70s.
Moonraker.
They did them. Well, they did The Man with the Golden Gun, which had Kung Fu. Right. Before that, it was the black exploitation films. So Live and Let Die became sort of a rehash of that. Moonraker, right, because of Star Wars.
Yep, that's why it was popular.
In fact, I think it was after The Spy Who Loved Me, it was announced that the next one was going to be For Your Eyes Only. At the end of The Spy Who Loved Me, it says Bond will be back in For Your Eyes Only. But they changed that between pictures because, wait a minute, Star Wars just hit big. Next one has to be Moonraker. So, and now with Daniel Craig, it's Bourne Identity. You know, let's follow the Jason Bourne character and they'll make him this flawed guy with issues and problems. And, you know, so now it's like, okay, Bond isn't necessarily cool anymore. Now he's just this guy that's got issues. And, you know, and again, it's not fair for me to completely judge it because I've only seen one. And, but I used to look forward to every Bond movie. I mean, I would get the magazines. I would, do whatever I could to find out what's happening in the new Bond movie. I would even try to track down scripts before it was easy to find them.
Right.
But I lost all interest when Daniel Craig took it over. Now, will I come back? Whatever they do next, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's almost like that ship has sailed. It's like watching an O.J. Simpson movie now. Can you really get into an O.J. Simpson movie today? You know, or if you see a movie that was pre-2001 and you see the Twin Towers in the movie, can you really not think about what happened there? It sort of ruins it. So that's what Daniel Craig's era did to me.
I know for me, a lot of the Daniel Craig era was kind of the Jason Bourne-ification, I guess. Exactly. It was a different style of action. And I could definitely see things coming back around to, you know, the older style, you know, the Sean Connery era, you know, the one George Lazenby offshoot. But like that older look, that older feel, I think can come back in kind of like a retro feel sort of thing. You just say it's a period piece. You film it back then. You gear everything back. I think it can come back. I really think there's meat on the bone left for James Bond. I really do.
They tried that with one of the video games. I don't know if you remember. They did From Russia with Love as a video game.
Okay.
And they got Sean Connery to do the voiceover for it. And this was made, I think, in 2002 or 2004 or something in that era. And it was kind of weird to see because at that time, Connery didn't sound like Bond. I mean, he kind of talked like this at this point. So you see this young avatar of Sean Connery that they made look like from the 60s. And then you'd hear his voice going, "My name is Bond, shaken, not stirred, please." So it was nostalgic to have Connery do it. But, it's sort of like, well, that's an era that's gone. So what are you going to do?
Now, getting back to your movies, one of the things that Todd and I love, you're going back to the early movies, the crazy credits, the stuff that you work in, the gags, the jokes, whether it be people that work on the film, then you get the recurring ones that are everything from like catering is by Brown Baggett to transportation is Our Cars. Anytime we see those, we love it. Now, again, I'm not going to say that you're the first movies that we've seen do it, but, I think we saw it in movies maybe like 86, 87. But, we're talking about movies going back to, that was in Vampire in Burbank. I'm giving you credit with being one of the first people to do that.
Well, I would say among the first. I don't know if we were the first. I think the first might have been Airplane. Because I think Airplane did it, and that was 1980. So ours was 83. So, we were in the general vicinity of that. But a lot of times it was just because there were no credits to put in these movies. I mean, most of the time it was me and 3 other people. So other than the actors, you didn't want to see like 3 credits go by and that's the end. Or a lot of times in low budget films, you see the same actor or the same producer's name over and over again. Written by so-and-so, directed by so-and-so, catering by so-and-so and all that. So I would take different names and sometimes I'd have them make fun with them. Sometimes I would make them sound like real names. But yeah, we would always pad our credits. To this day. We still do it. Because again, there's not a lot of names to go around. But I think there was one film we did, trying to remember where, I did the music for Colorblinded, but I didn't want to give myself credit as a music composer because I'm not. But I did it for that film because I found a new program that allowed you to pick up notes and move them around and make it sound kind of orchestral. So I used the name Marky Elfman.
I was just going to ask.
Yeah,
because when we saw that name come up, we wondered, we're like, is this like a lesser known Elfman or is this Mark having some fun? And then we tried to find the credits. Yeah. Right. Oh, that's so funny. As soon as you were going, I'm like, it's Marky Elfman. I knew it.
Yeah, and I think I take a credit for visual effects as Mark's Eye effect or something like that. You'll be surprised. Sometimes you'll see a mark in the credit, but it won't be specific. Like there used to be a sound company, I think it's still around, called Glen Sound. And I have a credit in one of my films as sound by Mark Sound, so.
Yes.
But and other times, like I say, sometimes there'll be names that almost sound completely legitimate, but it's only because we needed to pad the credits. My last few films, literally the crew was myself and my director of photography, Craig Bassick. We were the only 2 that were always on the set. Once in a while, we would have a hand, like I got a friend named Daniel Krause who comes out and helps us as continuity or whatever. Wasn't there every single day, but sometimes people will just show up to help out. But the nucleus of the crew were Bruce and myself. So, you need to pad things. So again, you want to, it's almost a smoke and mirror game because you don't want the film. I mean, people know it's low budget, but you don't want them to think it's that low budget. So, a lot of times the actors themselves will be crew members too. In fact, I think there's a scene in the abortion clinic in my last film where Deborah Lamb, who plays the ex-wife of Rudy, is in the abortion clinic. She's one of the patients, but she's wearing like a gray wig and she covers her face. And, so there's another scene in the restaurant where Damon's character, the black filmmaker, is talking to a producer in a restaurant. That's when the waitress comes out and she had her tits hanging out and all that. But there's a scene where we didn't have any extra. None of my extras showed up. So I have one character who played the abortionist who is the extra. So when the camera is on the black guy, you see the back of the head of Doug McPherson, who was the abortionist. And when the camera's the other way, you see the back of his head with a different shirt on, and I think a hat. And that's the same guy in both cuts. So, because he was the only guy that was there to be an extra. I think we had the bartender gal or the coffee server and one other guy that came by later. But these are the things you have to deal with. You know, when we shot the scene in Rage of Innocence where we needed a school filled with kids, we managed to get 7 kids. And we spread them out, you know, and they were supposed to look like 2 different classrooms of kids. And I told them, bring a different change of clothing. And if you got a hat or a wig or something, you know, in fact, I'm one of the kids in some of those scenes. So, you know, I don't look like I'm a teenager, and I didn't back then either. But there's a scene where I think I'm wearing a red shirt or a red velvet shirt. And you just see like the top of the head and the side of the shirt. But, you know, if they got a close-up of my face, I looked like Ringo's dad. You know, I actually looked like a kid. But I mean, these are things you do, you know, and we were lucky to get 7 kids.
We did note when we were watching Rage of Innocence that the age of the kids in the class varied wildly. And we're like, is this a high school class? Is it a college class? How are we getting away with it? I'm like, no, it's just who they had as extras that day. You
special ed. Yeah, it was like a special ed class, you know, whoever we could get. But yeah, I mean, again, these are the issues. Getting an extra in a film is probably almost as hard as getting an actor to commit, because it's probably harder because they know that they're not going to get anything out of this. You know, I mean, if they enjoy the process of being around filmmaking, then great. When we did Polish Vampire, you know, we had like a pool party scene. And I don't know if you ever saw, there's a documentary on the making of Polish Vampire, and I know that's online, that's on YouTube. But the pool party scene took like, I think, 8 nights to shoot, and each night we had less and less people. So there's some scenes where you see a lot of people standing around dancing, playing, whatever, and then as the nights progressed, you'd start seeing maybe 2 or 3 people in the corner, and then here's the main people there. You know, it just got to the point where there were less and less people because the novelty wears off. You know, if you're interested in being involved in a film, okay, the first night, wow, this is fun. You know, they're making movies, we're doing magic here. And then the second night, I don't know, all right, I'll show up. And then the third night, okay, I don't think I'm really enjoying this much anymore because there's a lot of waiting around. People get tired easily. You know, we shot a scene in a bar for Polish Vampire. A friend of mine owned a bar called Mucho Mas here, and it was in Burbank, and he let us have it from like, I think, midnight till 4 a.m, and we had it filled with a handful of extras, but we lost half of them by the end of the night, you know, because again, it's they get tired and there's no compensation, and sometimes we don't even have craft services, you know, so that was the first time I learned that you want to keep people as interested as possible. And you want them to really be into what you're doing, you know, and the ones that have made it to today, 40 years later, some of them are the same people from Polish Vampire. Bruce Heinsius, who was my director of photography on my last few films, he was just an extra on Polish Vampire. I met him when he was like 16 and just hung around the set, helped us out with whatever we needed to do. And, you know, we're still associates all these years later. Craig Bassick, another example, who was the cameraman on Polish Vampire and has gone on to DP a few of my other films and has gone on to do visual effects on my later films, you know, because we're in it because of the passion. You know, we're in it because we enjoy the process and we enjoy each other as friendship. You know, when he has something going, I'll help him. You know, that's the way it is with a lot of my actors and a lot of my crew. If any of them need me to help them on any of their projects, they don't even have to ask. You know, I'm there to help whatever they need to have done.
You had mentioned about craft services, and we had to laugh, of course, you know, little things. Sometimes you do a fantastic job with the budget, everything else involved of hiding or masking things, but there's the bit in Rage of Innocence where John and, you know, the female, his romantic interest, are outside eating lunch. And it appears as though they're eating the same empty hot dog bun for the entirety of the scene.
There wasn't a hot dog in those buns?
There absolutely was not.
Wow, see? I didn't even know that. I would have thought that we would have at least sprung for a hot dog. Well, I know there's a scene when they're at the pier with a Ferris wheel and all that.
Right.
And whatever they're eating there, I know there's real food because we bought it. But when the scene prior to that, that's weird. No, I didn't even think about that, but I would have thought that must have just been one of those oversights. Or maybe they ate it on one of the takes and we only ate one.
It looks like it's just an empty bun, but I have a question for you when it comes to like acting. I know you were in Polish Vampire in Burbank out of necessity because of what happened and everything like that. And I would see you in cameos throughout the films, and you doing the abortion commercial in the deceased won't desist is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life. You looking down the barrel of the camera the whole time was the best, and all the gags in it. But was there, after you did Polish Vampire, you never really wanted to act direct again? You just wanted to be behind the camera? Was it too hard, or you just don't like it, or?
Yeah, no, it's just one extra thing you have to worry about, and in addition to worrying about the camera work, the lighting, the sound, all that, now you got to worry about remembering lines. Now, in Queer Wolf, I was one of the 4 Torchmen. So, right. I don't even remember how that came about. One of them maybe didn't show up. I really don't know how I got into that part. I don't think that I planned on it. The bit with, let's see, wait a minute. In Deceased Won't Desist, the abortion commercial, originally it was going to be the guy that played the abortionist. He was going to be the guy in the commercial. I was going to be the abortionist. And I was going to take that role just because it was one less person I had to get up to that damn cabin. And I thought, we need to get 10 people up at this cabin. It's going to be almost impossible to coordinate 10 schedules. So I said, if I can take that role, that's one less person. Well, there was a misunderstanding. And when I told Doug I wanted him for that little part there, he misunderstood me and he thought he was going to be the abortionist. So then I thought, you know what? He's dependable. I can rely on him. I've used him before. So I gave him that role, and then I took the part in the commercial, and it worked out fine. But that's how that came about. And then I think the only other time I did a cameo was in Rectuma. I did the Hannibal Lecter character.
Yes, in the flashbacks, yes.
Yeah, and I don't even remember if that was another one of those, the guy didn't show up or whatever reason, but I never really write these with me planning on being in them, and usually now if I'm in them, it's just a quick thing to fill a hole. But, yeah.
And you as the torchbearer and all the other guys in the telephone booth is one of the best visual gags. Just the fact that you're climbing in windows in a house with flaming torches, and like you're 4 of you jammed in a phone booth with lit torches sticking out of it. I'm like, this is fantastic. And that's why I always liked when you'd show up as a cameo, because I thought you did such a good job, especially in Polish Vampire and in the abortionist commercial. So I hopefully we'll see some more of you. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't know. I think sometimes I'm an extra. I think in the scene where the 2 actors in Rage of Innocence are eating, having lunch during the school break, I'm pretty sure that most of the people you see walking back and forth are me. I think I know there's a scene when I'm sitting in the table behind, I think it's John's character, and I'm the extra there too. So most of the time. I'll fill a void. That's usually what I'll do if a body is needed somewhere. But for the most part, I've never really had a desire to be an actor. I starred in my first short, Buns, as the crazed hamburger killer. But again, and I did that because, you're not going to quit. You never know when you bring an actor in. Like when we did Queer Wolf, we had a hard time with the lead actor, Mike Palazzola, who played the Queer Wolf. He lost interest, but I learned my lesson from Polish Vampire. I had to kiss his ass a lot throughout the movie, and I had to cater to him and make him as happy as possible. But a lot of times he would show up not knowing his lines, not even looking at the script, and all the other actors are like looking at me like, would it kill you to hire somebody that knows what he's doing here? But and we were tour guides together, so I thought I could depend on him. But he stuck it out, but it was like pulling teeth. I mean, there would be some days where he would say, okay, I got to be out of here in 2 hours. It's like, Michael, we got 14 pages we have to do. Well, you got 2 hours. Okay, let's go, guys. So sometimes, again, when you know that you're going to get an actor that might screw around with you, you panic, especially once you've established them. If you haven't started with them, then you can always axe them, like that happened with Colorblinded. The lead actress in Colorblinded wasn't originally the one we ended up with. The girl that we hired, We shot with her for, I think, 1 or 2 days, and I saw the writing on the wall. She started to become a problem. So we fired her right away, and then brought in Danny Leone, who was a friend of mine, who ended up taking over the role, and she ended up playing the white version of that girl for the rest of the film. But you're at the mercy of your actors once you start shooting. If they decide they don't want to stick around, there's little you can do to keep them there if they're not happy.
You hear that so much, and really, obviously much different with low budget filmmaking versus big budget filmmaking. But to be the director, to be the person in charge, to be able to suss that out, to know the person who we're on day 1, and I could tell this person's not making it to day 8, day 12, day whatever, and to say, I'm hedging my bets now, get rid of this person now, let's find someone else.
Right.
And you also mentioned about how the roles ended up being reversed with Deceased, how you were going to play the abortionist role, and things got flip-flopped there. Had there ever been situations like that where you're filming and you have the principals there, this person is playing this role, that person's playing this role, 2-3 days in, you're like, no, this is wrong, let's flip these people around, or something of that nature, where another situation where you've seen something wasn't working out, or maybe someone was miscast at first, and you changed roles?
That happened pretty much in Queer Wolf, because once Michael Palazzolo, the star of the film, started giving us grief, I ended up rewriting it and giving a lot of the scenes to the character that played Richard Cheese, Kent Butler, because he was great. So all the scenes in the clinic when he's killing all those patients by accident, those were originally written for the Queer Wolf's character. He was the one that was supposed to keep screwing up, and he was the one that accidentally kept killing patients. But because Kent Butler, the actor who played Dick Cheese, was always professional, I said, you know what, let's just rewrite the scenes for him. And, the Queer Wolf character is off somewhere else. So we would cut to the scene where he's trying to cure the smoker or the alcoholic, or what was the other one, the overeater. It worked out fine. And I don't even think that Michael Palazzolo, the actor that played Queer Wolf, I don't even think he knew that we gave Kent the scenes. Because he probably never looked at the script. So that was probably the biggest chunk of change I had ever done in a movie, where we really made Richard Cheese's character a lot bigger than it was, because originally it was the Queer Wolf's movie. It was his character that had all these misfortunes, and with all the things that were happening in his life, he was always distracted. So he accidentally kept killing all of these therapy patients. But I thought, you know what, it works out with the other guy too, because he just doesn't give a shit. You know what I mean? His character was just so oblivious to everything, and he'd kill a patient and then just kind of sneak out. So it worked okay for his character as well. But that was probably the only time. And then with Deceased Won't Desist, the bit with John leaving the film, that was like another little change. But I think Queer Wolf was the biggest one, where I had to literally take chunks and move it over to somebody else.
Now, we've been bouncing around quite a bit, and I know we had mentioned before we started recording, with Celluloid Soul, we, a little bit more of a serious, but still, kind of a fanciful story in there. But the performance of the lead character psychiatrist and Judy Tenuta. Now, when I first saw Polish Vampire in Burbank a year ago, okay, let's find what else Mark has out there. Find his social media, find his YouTube. And I saw some stuff that you had done with Judy at that time. Mm-hmm. And then by the time that we ended up watching Celluloid Soul, I think it might have been like the week she passed. So we're kids of the 80s. We remember Judy being like this huge force in the world of comedy. How did you know Judy? What was your relationship like with her? And how did you convince her to get in one of your movies?
Well, I met her, I guess, in 2014. Basically, I just went to her website, and I think I sent her an email saying, Judy loved you from years gone by. Good, appreciate your comedy, whatever. And that was it. But I got a response. Thank you very much. Appreciate your comments and all that. It was a personal response. So I thought, wow. So I sent her another letter, and it was another little gushing kind of letter. As I was a kid, I saw you many times, blah, blah, blah. I forgot what I said. But anyway, she kept responding. Each time I would send an email, she would respond. So it got to a place where I mentioned I was a filmmaker, and I love the little things that you're doing right now, and I'd love to maybe help you out with some projects. Maybe we could do some short videos or whatever. So I guess once she was convinced I wasn't psycho or a stalker, we arranged to meet at a Starbucks, and we were there for about 2 or 3 hours, just talking and, telling each other about what we've been doing our lives with, whatever. Then I said, why don't we start a YouTube channel or just do some stuff? So she had a concept called the World Accordion to Judy, which were these little 3-minute segments, and it would be whatever, nothing planned, but we would just either do something based on whatever time of year it was, or if she had some crazy idea. So I would go to her house, and she had a green screen room. She had a room that had a green screen, and the wall was painted green, and we would shoot a lot of them there. And we did one, and then another, and then another, and another, and then we must have done over 50 of them. At least 50 of them. And some of them were funny. Some of them were almost funny. Some of them not so funny. But each one would start out with her singing, "It's the world, according to Judy." And then we would go into a bit. A lot of those are online. So after doing a bunch of these, I was about ready to do my film. And she knew I was a filmmaker. And I said, I would love to have you in my film if you're interested in doing it. And she goes, I would be happy to do it. I mean, I did all these videos for her, never charged her a dime for any of them, didn't want any money from her. So she was kind enough to do my film for free. She shot 3 days, and one day was actually, we shot it at her house. The final scene where she's doing her toenails and she's talking on the phone, that was shot at her house. The other 2 were shot in a psychiatrist's office where Robin Blythe, who played Gloria Sternbergen, who is now a psychotherapist as well as an actress, but she doesn't act as much anymore. She let us use her office for that sequence, and we shot with Judy. Now, my biggest concern is that Judy is a member of the Screen Actors Guild, and I was always afraid one day I was going to get a call from Judy saying, I just got a call from SAG. They don't like what I did, because I've gotten nailed by SAG before. Not me personally, but some of my actors have gotten nailed by SAG. Because I use SAG actors. I don't care if they're union or not, but all my movies are non-union. So at one point, SAG wanted to come down hard on the people that have been doing my movies over and over again, knowing they're non-union films. And I always thought, Judy was kind of high profile, and I was afraid they were going to catch her, but they never did. So we got away with that one. Anyway, we were going to do another film. I was actually going to direct a movie that she was going to star in. We had a script for it and everything, and then I think she backed out of it, and I think it was probably because of the cancer diagnosis. The last thing we did together, I don't know if you ever saw it, we did a video of her kicking cancer's ass.
The boxing thing, yeah.
Yeah. A year before she died, a year after she was diagnosed, she wrote this song, Kicking Cancer's Ass, and she said, wouldn't it be fun to make a video about this? And I said, yeah. And I went to Craig Bassick, my friend who does visual effects, and I said, do you think you can make like a giant cancer creature, and we'll just do this whole fun thing where she's kicking cancer's ass in the boxing ring? And he did it for nothing. I did it for nothing. And we shot Judy in front of a green screen and shot that whole thing. And she, you wouldn't know that anything was wrong with her. She was really spunky and had a good attitude, and she was really out to kick cancer's ass. And then over the months, I'd see her every once in a while, and she'd be okay, but she'd be going through chemo and had lower energy. And then the last month, I couldn't reach her. I sent her emails. I left voicemails. I texted her. I think the last text I sent to her was like, Judy, I'm really concerned. I'm not hearing anything from you. She did respond to that one. She said, I'm really sorry. I'm going through a lot of therapy right now. I'm not really seeing anybody. I'm not talking to anybody. And then she died, I think, like maybe a week after that. And I had heard from her caretaker that the last month she couldn't even really talk, and she was in a wheelchair. She wasn't really mobile at all. I mean, she was really circling the drain, So my big regret was that I didn't get to see her in her last month. And I did go to her funeral and her a memorial, and they created a nice little niche for her in the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, which where they put her urn and a bunch of pictures from her life and her CDs and just the little items from her life. But yeah, that was my association with Judy right up close to the end.
Right. And I will say, watching that recently, I was able to go back and watch all her YouTube stuff and comedy, and just to see how truly funny she was. It brought it back for me. So I thought that was, a great way to remember her. So yeah, I was
going to say the best video I think she's got out there that we did, I don't know if you saw it, where she is I'm a Mountain Girl. You ever see that one? Where she's singing like she's from the South. I'm a mountain girl. I like to smell feet. And anyway, we shot that video in 2017. It's online. You can find it. Just right. Judy Tenuta, Mountain Girl. But I think that's the best video we ever did. I think it's so sweet and so cute. And, she was full of life.
Right. Anyway. Let me ask you this. If you had to pick one Mark Pirro movie to get the full Mark Pirro experience, which one would you pick, recommend? Or are you going to give the answer where they're all my children and I love them equally? That's
the pretty standard response. No, I mean, every film has a different aspect to it. Like if we were to call them my children, Polish Vampire would be my firstborn. Queer Wolf would have probably been my edgy, college-educated student kid. Death Row Game Show, because it was my first 35 millimeter film. I would say that was the first one that became an adult. And Buford's Beach Bunnies, that was the one that came out a little retarded and sits in the corner and picks his nose. God Complex is probably my most sophisticated one. I don't think there's a specific one you can look at and say that represents me, because they're all, there might be a thread going through them, but I think they all have their own unique personality. I used to do a thing for my mom I would call the Marky Fun Tape series. And that was something every year I would encapsulate my life, whatever happened in that year, and I would make a variety show out of it. And I would send it to her. She lived in Florida, and she lived for these. It was cheaper than, it was easier than writing letters or talking or calling or whatever. So I would send her these videos. That probably is the best representation, because that's you're seeing whatever was happening in my life. Sometimes it would be production of the movies behind the scenes. Sometimes it would be just our Thanksgiving gatherings or our dinners or whatever. And I did that for over 20 years. So every year there would be a Marky Fun tape that would go to her. And some of those are online, but they're hidden. They're unlisted. You can probably, if you go to my website, you could probably find a way to get to them under past productions. And you might, each one runs like an hour and a half. And the only reason they turned into such productions, because they were just home movies on steroids. But because my mom used to show them to people, I said, well, if you're going to show these to people, then I got to make them a little more entertaining. So I'd start putting in puppet shows and commercials and, some of them looked like Saturday Night Live. We'd have variety sketches. And we really turned these into big productions. And that's probably the representation of me. But going to the films, no, I don't think you could point to any one film and say that represents Pirro production. I think it's just, whichever one you happen to catch. There's some people that like one, don't like another. There's some that like them all. I'm surprised that you liked them all. That's like winning the lottery, getting everybody. What I got, 11 movies, and if you've seen them all and they're all good for you, then I guess that's like winning the lottery, because it's pretty tough to please everybody, with all these different films.
Everything was enjoyable. Everything definitely we recommend to people. And it's funny you mentioned about the Marky Fun tapes, and you said that they're hidden around the website. I'm like, well, we trolled around the website a bunch looking for like bits and information and stuff, whether we were doing the episodes, when we were watching the movies, or getting prepared for this. I didn't even realize that they were unlisted. And I think I saw on your social media that you said you're doing another one for the first time in however many years this year, right?
Yeah, I am. And that's actually because the last one I did, which was 2016, it was 2 years after my mom had died, so I stopped the series mainly. At the end of that particular video, I say to everybody, okay, this is going to be the last one. I've been doing these for 20 years, and we're done with it. But I won't say forever, because I said, well, Johnny Carson, when he left The Tonight Show, he said, I'm leaving the Tonight Show, but I might come back and do something in the future. And then he died. So I said, well, I'm going to say maybe I'll come back and do one special or whatever. So it's been 7 years since we stopped the series. And I thought, okay, I've accumulated footage because I still, now you can shoot with your iPhone. I used to carry a little camera with me, but now, I have an iPhone. So I'll take video here and there of things. And I thought, okay, I've got 7 years worth of stuff. So I can condense it down, make an hour and a half show for the people that enjoyed the fun tape. I have a friend in Ireland who used to live for these. So I said, I got another one coming. And in fact, some of it is kind of melancholy because some of it does deal with the people we've lost. We've lost, 10 actors since the last one, that have died between 2016 and now. So I have a section where we have a memorial section like they do at the Academy Awards. Like we lost Bino from Death Row Game Show. We lost Conrad Brooks, who was in a bunch of my films, and Kitten Natividad, who was in Beach Bunnies. And anyway, so I make reference to that. And then, of course, when Judy died, I had to move her over to the tribute section too. But yeah, so we got one coming out for 2023, which is going to be like the old show with just a bunch of crazy stuff and some sad stuff. And we got a couple of locations that we go visit. I used to do that on some of my tapes where I would go to famous locations and point out where they shot Psycho or whatever, Halloween, any of those things. So we got a couple of those in there as well. And, a couple of sketches. And, it'll be publicized when it does come out, but it will probably be hidden too. So you'll have to stay on top of social media to keep an eye on that.
So other than the next Marky Fun tape, what else do you have on your slate? What is coming up next from Mark Pirro?
You know what? Right now, I'm sort of considering myself semi-retired.
Oh.
Yeah, I think I've kind of gotten to a place where, and I say, well, look, I'm a senior citizen now. I should be collecting Social Security. So this is a young man's game. And the things that we did when we were kids, we were fearless. I had a guy hanging from a helicopter in Nudist Colony of the Dead without a permit. I wouldn't want to try that today. And today, if somebody caught me doing that, they'd say, you should know better. You're an older guy. When you're in your 20s, they'll, oh, he's just a kid. He's dumb, But so we did a lot of dumb things that we got away with. Nobody's ever gotten killed or hurt on any of my films. And I think I've probably been pushing the envelope too far, without having any kind of insurance. If anybody had gotten hurt on any of my films, that could have wiped me out. So my attitude now is I'm kind of done. I might be a hired gun, like if somebody else is producing a movie and they want me to run the set or to be a consultant or to even yell action and cut. Okay, possibly. But to put the whole show together and the whole shebang and get everybody together again, I don't know if I have what it takes anymore. I think Tarantino once said even a prize fighter at some point needs to know when it's time to get out of the ring. Because there are some filmmakers that overstay their welcome. I think he might have used Blake Edwards as an example, who was very funny in his earlier days, but the last several films were just almost like, time to stop. I think Woody Allen might even be another example. He's still got a couple of them, but I've seen like his last few films, and it's almost like, okay, you're just phoning it in now. So anyway, that's kind of where I think I'm at the moment. Now, this could change. I could get a burst of inspiration and as I'm playing shuffleboard, finally decide that I want to try and make another movie. I hate to never say never, but as for right now, kind of considering myself retired.
Well, again, it's sad to hear that there won't be at least something definitively coming in the near future, but whenever something does come, Todd and I, of course, will be certainly ready for it and want to push that out there. So where can our listeners find more information about you? Where's the best way to keep up on Mark Pirro, support Mark Pirro? And listen, I'll make no bones about it. What's the best way that they could put money in your pocket?
Buy a Submissive Jesus head. There you go. That's the one thing I did merchandising on. I don't know if you're aware of that. Yeah. But when we did the God Complex, the movie ends with God and Jesus working in a toy manufacturing facility. And we created the Submissive Jesus prayer answering talking head for that scene. And then at that time, I thought, you know what? let's try and really market this. So we made 2,500 of these talking Jesus heads. And what they do is you pray to it, then you twist the crown of thorns on his head, and the pain makes him shriek, and then he will answer your prayer with 100 random phrases. He'll say 100 different things. And we sold about 960 of them, I think, out of 2,500. So I still have a few left. But yeah, that's a great way to do it. And that you can go to thesubmissivejesus.com and you can get one there. You can also go to my website, which is pirromount.com. That's where all of our movies are available on DVD. We sell props. I have some people that have bought props from the movies. Like somebody bought the medallion from Curse of the Queer Wolf with John Wayne's picture on it to protect you from the power of the Queer Wolf. Somebody bought that. They paid $500 for it. And we've got a lot of other items that are from the movies that, just sitting in the archives. So yeah, pirromount.com or thesubmissivejesus.com is where you can find all kinds of stuff. I have a Facebook page as well. Who doesn't, right? And what else do we have? I think that's about it. I'm not a Twitter guy. In fact, I dumped all my Twitter when they gave Trump his opportunity to come back. I said, I don't want to be part of this one anymore. So I don't have a Twitter account. And what's left? If you want to stalk me, I live in Van Nuys behind a gate.
All right.
No, I basically, I think that's everything. I can't think of any other way. I sell my ass on Hollywood and Vine every once in a while. But that doesn't really net very much. So that's...
Well, yeah. Mr. Pirro, again, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, for coming on the podcast with us. Believe you, Mark was nice enough to have his camera on. Todd and I never have our cameras on, but the whole time I've had a big giant smile on my face talking about your movies. And like I said, know that there's always an audience out there. And if we could do like a little tiny bit to get your name out there, to get your films out in the eyes of other people, then, we're going to be torchbearers for you until the day that we're no longer able to move ourselves.
Well, that's great. So people actually, they'll sit here for the whole 2 hours and listen to this whole thing?
Yes.
Wow.
We hope. No, yeah.
Fingers crossed. In bits. They might take it on the road with them, maybe share it with their kids. I'm going to make my kid listen to this when he wakes up tomorrow before school.
Oh, good. He'll need a lot of therapy when he gets older.
That's what we're hoping to avoid. This just do the opposite of everything that we're talking about here.
Well, let me ask you one question before you go, if I may, and that's, how did you discover me in the first place? Was it from USA Network, or how did that come about?
It was from this is Todd. Yeah, it was for me. Whenever I think I have a Mandela effect now of how I saw A Polish Vampire in Burbank. Mm-hmm. I always thought it was USA Up All Night, but that didn't start until I was in my late teens, 18 or 19. But I saw it earlier. So you saying that it was one of the first out on video? We were one of the families around here that had the first VHS players. So I'm guessing I might have gotten it from my local video store, when it was run out of a house, 2 blocks from me. I'd go get a video. So whether it was USA or it was me renting the video, and then me and my brother fell in love with that, and then pushing it on other people when I would see it on TV. And then this showing it to Joe made us go we have to go back and watch everything. You know what I mean? I did see some here or there, but I didn't remember it, if that makes any sense. So that's how I found you.
And I will say, I never knew it was you, but I definitely saw Death Row Game Show at the local video store. I definitely saw Buford's Beach Bunny at the video store. I'm almost certain that My Mom is a Werewolf played on HBO daytime during the week a bunch. And Curse of the Queer Wolf, you mentioned it before, the bit with the John Wayne medallion. When I saw that, and I'm I've seen that before. So I definitely saw your movies here and there when I was younger, but I never put them together to you. And again, when you're a kid, you're 8, 9, 10 years old watching these movies, you're not really paying attention to who the writer and who the director is. When you get a little bit older, those pieces start to come together. And obviously now in our 40s, whatever it is, with the access of the internet, we just consume. You find one piece of media and you want the rest of whoever made that media.
Got it. All right. Well, I'm glad that it worked out for you and that you haven't turned into serial killers or anything like that.
The night's not over yet.
Yeah,
so.
That's true. Yeah, you can still snap. There's still time.
Yes. Again, thank you very much, Mr. Pirro, for spending some time with us, and thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you guys here next month.
Adios.